Now I did look up. And what did he say to that? Daniel hesitated, which told me everything. Let me guess. No offense meant, just keeping things real. Or maybe, can't your wife take a joke? Something like that, Daniel admitted. Look, he's an ass sometimes, but he didn't mean to. To what? Humiliate me? Dismiss an idea with genuine market potential because it came from a woman? From your wife, specifically? He's under a lot of pressure. We just lost the Harrington account and stop making excuses for him, I snapped, slapping my palm against the coffee table. This isn't about James having a bad day. This is about a systematic pattern of disrespect, not just toward me, but toward an entire demographic that your firm consistently ignores. Daniel looked at the papers spread around me, his eyes catching on the business plan title on my screen. His expression shifted from conciliatory to confused. What is this, Olivia? I straightened, feeling a strange calm settle over me. This is my next step. Your next... Wait, are you serious? You're starting your own firm because James was a jerk today? I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. No, Daniel. I'm starting my own firm because today made me realize I've been waiting for permission I don't need. I've been tiptoeing around your career, your partners, your firm, hoping to be invited to the table. Well, guess what? I'm building my own table. Now? He stared at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man who had once been my biggest champion, the man who had marveled at my financial models in graduate school, who had bragged to his friends about my job offers. What about our agreement, that you might join Reynolds and Mitchell? That agreement expired somewhere between cute idea and belly laughter, Daniel. He stood and paced to the window, looking out at the lake, hands in his pockets. This is going to create complications. For whom, exactly? He turned back to me, his expression troubled. For us. For me at the firm. James isn't just my business partner, Liv. He's my oldest friend. And I'm your wife, I said quietly. Where does that factor in your list of complications? Daniel didn't answer immediately, which was an answer in itself. I need to think, he finally said, loosening his tie further. This is a lot to process. I turned back to my laptop. Take all the time you need. I'll be here building my company. He disappeared into our bedroom, and I returned to my business plan, the determination in my chest burning even hotter. By midnight, I had the bones of Aurelia Financial sketched. Out, a comprehensive financial services platform specifically designed for women, combining education, investment tools, and wealth management services tailored to women's unique financial journeys. No pink websites. No condescending language. Just sophisticated financial services that acknowledged the realities women faced. Longer lifespans, career gaps for caregiving, wage disparities, and different risk profiles. When Daniel emerged from the bedroom hours, later I was still working, surrounded by empty coffee cups. You're really serious about this, he said softly. I looked up at him, at the man I'd loved for a decade, suddenly seeing him with new clarity. Deadly serious. He nodded slowly. I want to support you, Olivia. I do. But you have to understand how awkward this will be for me at the firm. I understand completely, I replied, my voice steady despite the disappointment settling in my stomach. And you have to understand that I'm doing this with or without your support. The line was drawn. Not with shouting or ultimatums, but with a quiet declaration of independence that would fundamentally alter the foundation of our marriage. The next morning, I called Patricia Vega, an attorney I'd met at a charity function who specialized in business formation. By noon, I had an appointment. By the end of the week, Aurelia Financial LLC existed on paper. I withdrew $200,000 from my personal savings, money I'd set aside from my Goldman years, and deposited it as the company's initial capital. Daniel and I moved around each other like polite strangers in our apartment, careful not to directly address what was happening. He went to work. I converted our guest room into an office. He attended partner dinners. I networked with potential team members. We slept in the same bed, but with a careful space between us that hadn't been there before. 2 weeks after James's laughter, I signed a lease on a small office space in the West Loop, an up-and-coming area filled with tech startups and creative agencies. It was nothing like the prestigious Michigan Avenue address of Reynolds and Mitchell, but the exposed brick, walls and industrial windows gave it character. More importantly, the rent wouldn't drain my startup capital too quickly. "You're really doing this," said Mia, my best friend since college, as she helped me arrange furniture in the new space. I'm still in shock. Happy shock, but shock. Mia had been the first person I called after the disastrous meeting. She'd shown up at our apartment with a bottle of tequila and unwavering support. Now, as we positioned my desk near the windows, I couldn't imagine doing this without her. "Sometimes I can't believe it either," I admitted, adjusting the ergonomic chair I'd splurged on. But then I remember James's laugh, and suddenly it all makes perfect sense. "Living well is the best revenge," Mia said, unpacking books onto shelves. "Though bankrupting sexist financial bros comes in a close second." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. "I don't need to bankrupt them. I just need to show them what they missed." "And you will," she said confidently. "So what's next? On your world domination checklist?" I pulled out a folder from my bag. "Finding my CTO. I've identified 3 candidates, all women who've worked in fintech and have experience building consumer-facing financial platforms. And they're willing to leave stable jobs for a startup? 2 of them were recently passed. Over for promotions in favor of less qualified men," I said. "The 3rd is coming back from maternity leave to find her role has been restructured. So yes, I think they might be interested in a company that actually values them." Mia nodded approvingly. "The talent pool of underestimated women must be massive." "It is," I confirmed. "And that's going to be Reynolds and Mitchell's loss and my gain." My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Working late tonight. Don't wait." 3 months ago, I would have prepared dinner anyway, kept it warm for whenever he came home. Tonight, I texted back a simple okay and turned my attention back to building my future. By the 1-month mark, Aurelia Financial had a team of 5, myself as CEO, Jessica Chen as CTO, Daria Williams as CFO, Marcus King as our marketing director, and Zoe Allen as our UX designer. We worked elbow to elbow in our modest office, fueled by passion and the collective experience of being underestimated. I hadn't initially planned to hire a man for our core team, but Marcus had been the most qualified candidate by far. During his interview, he'd mentioned watching his single mother struggle with financial institutions that talked down to her. "Financial literacy shouldn't be a luxury," he'd said, and I knew immediately he understood our mission. With my team in place, we began building the Aurelia platform in earnest. Jessica led the technical development, creating an architecture that would allow us to scale rapidly. Daria structured our financial models, ensuring we had runway for at least 18 months. Before needing additional funding, Zoe designed an interface that was sophisticated without being intimidating, and Marcus crafted messaging that respected our users' intelligence. At home, the distance between Daniel and me continued to grow. We maintained the facade of a functioning marriage, attending his firm's summer gala together, hosting a dinner party for his clients, taking his parents to brunch when they visited from Boston. But underneath the performance, something fundamental had shifted. "We need to talk about this at some point," Daniel said one night as we prepared for bed, breaking our unspoken agreement to avoid the subject of my company. I looked at him through the bathroom mirror as I removed my makeup. "About what, specifically?" "About what happens when Aurelia launches. About whether we're competing directly. About what James will think." I turned to face him, eye makeup remover in hand. "What James will think? That's what you're worried about?" Daniel sat heavily on the edge of our bed. You know what I mean? It's complicated. It's really not, I said, turning back to the mirror. Aurelia serves a different market segment than Reynolds and Mitchell. We're not going after your clients. Our high net worth client base includes plenty of women, he pointed out. Women who already have financial advisors, I countered. I'm targeting women who have been ignored by traditional firms. Women who are building wealth, not just managing it. There's plenty of market to go around. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. James thinks you're doing this to get back at him. To embarrass the firm. I laughed sharply, turning off the bathroom light and walking past him to my side of the bed. Of course he does. Heaven forbid he consider that I'm building something because I see a genuine market opportunity, not because of his fragile ego. Is he wrong? Daniel asked quietly. Is there no element of proving him wrong in what you're doing? I pulled back the covers and sat on the bed, facing him across the expanse of our king-size mattress. Would you ask a male founder that question? Would you suggest a man is starting a business out of spite rather than ambition? That's not fair, Olivia. None of this is fair, I replied. But to answer your question, yes, proving James wrong will be deeply satisfying. But it's a nice bonus, not my primary motivation. I genuinely believe in what I'm building. Daniel nodded slowly. I believe you believe that. The careful phrasing stung more than an outright accusation would have. I turned off my bedside lamp and lay down with my back to him, creating a topography of unspoken words between us. I did try to bring you into the firm, he said into the darkness. Multiple times. James always had reasons why the timing wasn't right. I closed my eyes, absorbing this new information. And you accepted those reasons. I thought eventually he'd come around, that he'd see your value. But he never did, I said. And now you're worried that if I succeed, it proves you should have fought harder for me, that you chose the wrong side. The silence that followed confirmed I'd hit the mark. I felt Daniel shift on his side of the bed, but he didn't reach for me, and I didn't reach for him. I don't want to choose sides, he finally said. Sometimes not choosing is its own choice, Daniel. We both lay awake for hours after that, trapped in our private thoughts, separated by inches that felt like miles. 6. Weeks before our scheduled launch, I was working late in the office, reviewing the final beta test results with Jessica. Our app was performing beautifully, with intuitive navigation between educational content, investment tools, and personalized financial roadmaps. Users could start with the basics and gradually access more sophisticated features as their knowledge and comfort level increased. The engagement metrics are off the charts, Jessica said, scrolling through the data, especially for the scenario-based learning modules. Women are spending 3 times longer on the app than we projected. That's because no one has ever bothered to explain these concepts in context before, I replied, feeling a surge of pride in what we'd built. Abstract explanations of market volatility mean nothing, but if you frame it as, here's why your retirement account dropped 10% and here's why you shouldn't panic, suddenly it clicks. Jessica nodded. The personalization algorithms are working too. The more users engage, the more tailored the content becomes. My phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see Daniel's name on the screen. We'd been circling each other cautiously since our late-night conversation weeks ago, maintaining the outward appearance of a united front while growing increasingly estranged in private. I should take this, I said to Jessica. Why don't you head home? We can continue tomorrow. She gathered her things as I answered the call. Hello? Olivia. Daniel's voice sounded tight, controlled. Where are you? At the office. We're finalizing. The platform before launch. Why? I just got home and found some interesting mail. Care to explain why we received a cease and desist letter from Reynolds and Mitchell's attorneys? My blood ran cold. What? They're claiming you misappropriated proprietary information, client targeting strategies, investment models, The works. That's ridiculous, I said, my mind racing. Aurelia's approach is completely different from R&M's. They're saying you had access to confidential information through me, Daniel continued, his voice hardening. That you exploited our relationship to compete unfairly. I gripped the edge of my desk. That's absurd and insulting. Everything we've built is original. Is it? Because James seems pretty convinced you've been going through my files. He's got the partners believing you've been planning this for years, gathering intelligence while pretending to be the supportive wife. And you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What do you believe? The pause before he answered told me everything. I think you've been so focused on proving him wrong that you haven't considered the collateral damage, he finally said. My reputation at the firm is on the line, Olivia. They're questioning my integrity because of you. The accusation hung in the air between us, transmitted through miles of fiber optic cable, yet landing like a physical blow. I see, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. So, to be clear, your business partner humiliates me, dismisses my professional capabilities, and when I build something on my own merit, the assumption is I must have stolen ideas from the great minds at Reynolds and Mitchell because I couldn't possibly have come up with them myself. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you implied. I took a deep breath. I'll have my attorney contact R&M's legal team in the morning. This is harassment, Daniel, and we both know it. This could get ugly, he warned. It already is, I replied. And for the record, I've never accessed your files, your laptop, or anything related to your firm. Every idea in Aurelia is mine or my team's. The fact that you even momentarily entertained the possibility that I would do otherwise tells me everything I need to know about where we stand. I ended the call before he could respond, setting down my phone with trembling hands. For a moment, I sat perfectly still in my quiet office, absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. Then I picked up my phone again and called Patricia Vega. They're scared, she said after I explained the situation. They wouldn't bother with legal intimidation if they didn't see you as a legitimate threat. But we haven't even launched yet, I pointed out. Exactly. They're trying to kill you in the cradle. She paused. There's something else you should know. I have contacts at several firms. Word is that Reynolds and Mitchell lost 2 more major clients last quarter. They're vulnerable, and they know it. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. So this isn't really about me stealing their precious ideas. It's about eliminating potential competition when they're already weakened. That would be my assessment, Patricia confirmed. How do you want to proceed? I glanced around the office we'd built from nothing, at the whiteboards covered with our plans and dreams, at the mission statement framed on the wall. Financial empowerment isn't a luxury, it's a right. We fight, I said, my resolve hardening with each word. We launch as planned, and we show them exactly what they should have been afraid of all along. As I hung up the phone, I felt something unexpected amid the anger and determination. Gratitude. If James hadn't laughed at my idea that day, I might still be waiting for a seat at their table instead of building my own empire. His laughter had set me free, and soon it would be my turn to laugh all the way to the bank. The cease and desist letter became our war banner. I called an emergency team meeting the next morning, gathering everyone in our small conference room. The exposed brick walls that had once felt charming now seemed to close in around us as I explained the situation. Reynolds and Mitchell is claiming I stole proprietary information, I said, sliding copies of the letter across the table. They're threatening legal action if we proceed with our launch. Daria, our CFO, adjusted her glasses as she scanned the document. This is ridiculous. Our entire approach is different from traditional firms like R&M. It's a scare tactic, Jessica agreed, her expression hardening. Classic move from an established player trying to crush innovation. Marcus leaned forward, his marketing mind already spinning. We could use this, David versus Goliath narrative. Women-led startup bullied by traditional finance bros. He caught himself. Sorry, that was unprofessional. It was accurate, I replied with a thin smile. But we're not playing the victim card. We fight this on the merits. Zoe, typically the quietest team member, surprised me by speaking up. What if we accelerate the launch? They're expecting us to back down or get tied up in legal proceedings. What if we just go? 4 pairs of eyes turned to me, waiting for my decision. The weight of their careers, their trust, their futures pressed down on my shoulders. They'd left stable jobs to join a startup that might be crushed before it even began. Patricia thinks they're vulnerable, I said slowly. That this aggression comes from weakness, not strength. I stood and walked to the whiteboard where our launch timeline was meticulously mapped out. I erased the date set 6 weeks in the future and wrote a new one. 2 weeks from today. We're launching early, I announced. Full platform, full marketing. Push! Jessica, can the tech be ready? She nodded, already calculating in her head. We'll need to pull some all-nighters, but yes, the core functionality is solid. Daria, what's our runway if we accelerate marketing spend? She tapped figures into her tablet. 14 months instead of 18. Tight but doable if we hit our user acquisition targets. I turned to Zoe and Marcus. We need a launch strategy that turns this attack into an advantage without explicitly mentioning R&M. We take the high road publicly while making it crystal clear to industry insiders what's happening. Marcus was already scribbling notes. On it. I'm thinking testimonials from beta users, emphasis on original approach, media placements that highlight the innovation gap in women's financial services. Perfect, I said, feeling a surge of gratitude for this team that had become my war council. Let's move. As the team dispersed to execute our accelerated plan, I retreated to my office to make the hardest call of all. I took a deep breath and dialed Daniel's number. I can't talk now, he answered tersely. I'm heading into a partners meeting. This will only take a minute, I said. I wanted to give you a courtesy heads up that we're proceeding with our launch. I've retained counsel to respond to the cease and desist letter, which we both know is baseless. His sigh was heavy with resignation. This is a mistake, Olivia. The mistake was thinking I needed anyone's permission to succeed, I replied, including yours. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd once meant to each other. I won't be home tonight, he finally said. I need to figure some things out. Take all the time you need, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice despite the tremor in my chest. I'll be busy launching my company. 2 days later, I was sorting through the final marketing materials when Patricia called. Reynolds and Mitchell filed for an emergency injunction this morning, she said without preamble. They're trying to legally prevent your launch. My stomach dropped, but my voice remained calm. On what grounds? Same as before. Alleged misappropriation of trade secrets. But they've added something new. They're claiming breach of fiduciary duty. Whose fiduciary duty? Your husband's. They're arguing that as a partner, he had a duty to protect the firm's interests, and that by allowing you to start a competing business, he breached that duty. I gripped the edge of my desk. They're dragging Daniel into this? It's a pressure tactic, Patricia explained. They know attacking your marriage creates leverage. The subtext is clear. If he reins you in, they'll drop that part of the complaint. The calculation was so cold, so precisely targeted at what they perceived as my weakness, that for a moment I couldn't speak. Olivia, Patricia prompted. We need to respond quickly. The hearing is set for tomorrow morning. I forced myself back to the present. We proceed as planned. Can you handle the injunction? Already working on it. We have solid counterarguments. But you should prepare for the possibility that the launch might be delayed. After we hung up, I sat motionless, staring at the wall. They were using my marriage as ammunition, making Daniel choose explicitly between his partnership and his wife, a choice I'd been careful not to force, despite everything. My phone buzzed, with a text from Daniel. "We need to talk. Coming to your office now." 20 minutes later, he walked through the door looking like he hadn't slept in days. His normally immaculate suit was slightly rumpled, his eyes shadowed. "Did you know about this?" I asked before he could speak. "Using our marriage as a legal weapon?" He dropped heavily into the chair across from my desk. "I found out this morning. James pushed it through while I was meeting with clients in Detroit. And what did you do when you found out?" Daniel ran a hand over his face. "I told him it was a step too far, that attacking you was one thing, but making our marriage a legal issue crossed a line. And he said if I wasn't comfortable with their strategy, perhaps I should reconsider my position at the firm." The implications hung in the air between us. After a decade of friendship and partnership, James had just threatened Daniel's career. Because of me. Because of us. "So what happens now?" I asked quietly. Daniel looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in months. "That depends on what you want, Olivia. If you delay your launch, withdraw your filing with the SEC, this all goes away. The firm drops the complaints, your reputation stays intact, and we figure out our next steps. And if I don't?" His expression was pained. "Then we're in for an ugly legal battle that drags both our names through the mud. And even if you win, the cost..." He trailed off. "The cost would be our marriage," I finished for him. Daniel didn't deny it. We sat in silence, the gravity of the moment settling around us like fine dust. "What do you want me to do?" I finally asked. He looked startled by the question. "I want this nightmare to end. I want my wife back. I want things to go back to how they were before." I smiled sadly. "Before what exactly? Before I decided to value my own ambitions? Before I stopped accepting being treated as an afterthought? Those things aren't coming back, Daniel. That version of me is gone." "Then what are we doing here?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "What's left for us?" I leaned forward, looking him directly in the eyes. "That depends on whether you can see me, really see me, as I am now. Not as your wife who needs protection, not as a liability to your career, but as your equal. Someone with just as much right to professional fulfillment as you have." Daniel stood abruptly and walked to the window, hands shoved in his pockets as he looked out at the Chicago skyline. "I don't know if I can be who you need me to be right now." "I'm not asking you to be anything," I said. "I'm asking you to let me be everything I am." He turned back to me, his expression unreadable. "The hearing is at 9 tomorrow. I suppose we'll both have our answers then." After he left, I called the team together one last time. "If the injunction is granted tomorrow, we'll have to delay our launch," I explained. "But I want to be absolutely clear. We are launching this company. If not tomorrow, then as soon as legally possible." They nodded, faces set with determination. "There's something else you should know," I continued. "This fight might get personal. The opposition is using my marriage as leverage. I won't let that affect our company, but I want to be transparent about what we're facing." "We're with you," Jessica said firmly. "All the way." Their solidarity brought a lump to my throat. "Thank you. Now, let's prepare two scenarios, one where we launch tomorrow as planned, and one where we pivot to a holding pattern while fighting the injunction." As they filed out, Marcus lingered. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "my mother would have killed for a service like ours when she was raising me alone. What we're building matters, Olivia. Don't let them convince you otherwise." His words stayed with me as I worked through the night, preparing my statement for the court. Around 3 a.m., I took a break and wandered to the small kitchen area, surprised to find Daria still there, poring over financial projections. "You should get some sleep," I told her. She looked up with tired eyes. So should you, but I suspect neither of us will tonight. I made us both tea, and we sat in companionable silence for a moment. Can I ask you something personal? Daria finally said. You don't have to answer. I nodded. If the judge forces you to choose between Aurelia and your marriage, what will you do? The question struck me like a physical blow, even though I'd been asking myself the same thing for hours. I don't know, I admitted. A month ago, I would have said my marriage comes first. Always. But now? I stared into my tea, watching the steam rise and dissipate. Now I'm not sure I can be the person Daniel married anymore. And I'm not sure he can love the person I've become. Daria reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. For what it's worth, I think this version of you is pretty remarkable. When dawn broke, I was still at my desk, my decision made. I would not back down. Whatever the cost, Aurelia Financial would become reality. Women deserved better than what the financial industry had offered them, and I would deliver it, with or without Daniel by my side. The hearing room was packed. Financial reporters lined the back wall, alerted by the unusual spectacle of a spousal conflict playing out in business court. Reynolds and Mitchell had sent their top counsel, a stern-faced woman in her 50s who had made her career defending Wall Street firms against discrimination claims. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat with Patricia at one table, my team lined, up in the row behind us for moral support. Across the aisle, the R&M attorneys arranged their materials with practiced precision. James sat directly behind them, his expression smug. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. The absence hit me harder than I'd expected. Despite everything, some childish part of me had hoped he would choose me in the end. Would sit beside me, publicly, declaring his support. The empty space where he should have been ached like a phantom limb. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Meyers entered the courtroom. The proceedings began with R&M's counsel laying out their case. They painted me as an opportunist who had leveraged intimate knowledge of their business strategies to create a competing firm. They emphasized Daniel's position as a partner and my access to his confidential information through our marriage. Your Honor, their attorney concluded, we are not trying to prevent Ms. Mitchell from starting a business. We are simply asking that she not be allowed to use misappropriated information and strategies to do so. The launch should be delayed until a full review of Aurelia Financial's platform can be conducted to ensure it contains no proprietary R&M elements. The judge turned to Patricia. Counsel for the defense? Patricia rose smoothly. Your Honor, Reynolds and Mitchell's claims are not only baseless, but represent a transparent attempt to stifle legitimate competition. My client has not used any proprietary information in developing her platform. In fact, Aurelia Financial's approach is fundamentally different from R&M's in both target market and methodology. She methodically dismantled their arguments, pointing out that R&M had historically shown little interest in the market segment Aurelia was targeting. She emphasized my own professional credentials and experience in financial services, independent of my husband's firm. As for the breach of fiduciary duty claim, Patricia continued, it is a thinly veiled attempt to weaponize Ms. Mitchell's marriage. There is no legal basis for preventing a spouse from pursuing their own professional interests simply because they happen to be in the same industry. The judge asked several pointed questions, then indicated he would take a brief recess before ruling. As the courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations, the door at the back opened. Daniel walked in. My heart lurched painfully in my chest as he made his way down the center aisle. He nodded briefly to me, his expression unreadable, then approached the R&M attorneys and leaned down to speak to them in hushed tones. James's face darkened as the conversation continued. After a tense exchange, Daniel straightened and walked to the front of the courtroom. He spoke briefly to the clerk, who disappeared into the judge's chambers. A moment later, the clerk reappeared and announced the judge would return immediately. What's happening? I whispered to Patricia. I don't know, she replied, watching Daniel with narrowed eyes as he took a seat in the gallery. Apart from both, our table and R&M's Judge Meyers returned, his expression grave. I understand Mr. Mitchell wishes to address the court. Daniel stood. Yes, Your Honor. As a partner at Reynolds and Mitchell and the husband of Olivia Mitchell, I believe I have relevant information pertaining to this case. My stomach clenched. Was he about to publicly side with the firm against me? Proceed, the judge said. Daniel buttoned his suit jacket, a gesture I'd seen him make 1,000 times before important presentations. Your Honor, the claim that my wife misappropriated proprietary information from Reynolds and Mitchell is categorically false. I can state with absolute certainty that Olivia Mitchell developed her business concept and platform independently, drawing on her own considerable expertise in financial services. A murmur ran through the courtroom. James half rose from his seat, his face flushing with anger, before one of the attorneys yanked him back down. Furthermore, Daniel continued, his voice gaining strength, I can attest that Reynolds and Mitchell has no legitimate interest in the market segment Aurelia Financial aims to serve. In partners meetings over the past 3 years, proposals to develop services specifically for women investors were repeatedly dismissed as niche and not worth the investment. He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. I have provided the clerk with minutes from these meetings, which I am authorized to access as a partner. They clearly document the firm's lack of interest in this market, directly contradicting their claim that Ms. Mitchell's venture would harm their business interests. The judge accepted the flash drive, then asked, And the breach of fiduciary duty claim? Daniel's gaze briefly met mine across the courtroom. That claim represents a fundamental misunderstanding of both partnership law and marital autonomy. My fiduciary duty to the firm does not extend to controlling my wife's professional choices, nor does it require me to prevent her from using her own expertise to build a business. He turned to face the R&M contingent directly. If the firm wishes to pursue that claim, they should direct it at me, not my wife. And I am prepared to defend my position that supporting my wife's venture in no way breaches my obligations to the partnership. The implications hung heavy in the air. Daniel had just publicly challenged his partners, potentially sacrificing his career in the process. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, the judge said. Please be seated while I consider this new information. The recess lasted only 15 minutes. When Judge Meyers returned, his decision was swift and definitive. Having reviewed the evidence, including Mr. Mitchell's testimony and the newly provided documentation, I find insufficient grounds for an emergency injunction. Reynolds and Mitchell has failed to demonstrate that irreparable harm would result from Aurelia Financial's launch, particularly given the evidence that the two firms target different market segments. He looked over his glasses at the R&M attorneys. The breach of fiduciary duty claim is dismissed as improperly directed and legally unsound. Ms. Mitchell is free to proceed with her business launch as planned. With a bang of his gavel, it was over. We had won. The courtroom erupted in activity, reporters rushing out to file their stories, the R&M team huddling in grim conversation, my own team exchanging relieved embraces. Through it all, I remained seated, watching Daniel as he stood alone in the center of the storm. Our eyes met across the chaos. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Respect. Not patronizing support or reluctant tolerance, but genuine respect, from my husband to me, professional to professional. He nodded once, a gesture so small yet so profound, before turning to walk out of the courtroom. I knew he was heading into the fight of his professional life. James would never forgive this betrayal, and Daniel's future at the firm was almost certainly over, yet he had chosen not Reynolds and Mitchell, not James, me. As I gathered my things to leave, a text message appeared on my phone. Launch your company. We'll figure out the rest later. I'm proud of you. For the first time in months, I felt the weight on my chest begin to lift. Aurelia Financial would launch tomorrow, And whatever came next, for the company, for my marriage, for me, I would face it standing tall. The game had changed, the pieces had been rearranged, and I was no longer playing defense. Launch day arrived with the kind of perfect autumn crispness that made Chicago gleam. From my office window, I watched the early morning sun catch on glass skyscrapers, transforming them into pillars of light. Somewhere in one of those towers, Daniel was likely packing his personal items into a cardboard box. He hadn't come home after the hearing. A brief text explained he needed to handle the fallout at Reynolds and Mitchell. I'd spent the night finalizing launch preparations, pushing aside the complicated emotions swirling around my marriage to focus on the task at hand. At 7:45 a.m., my team gathered in our small conference room. Eyes bright with a combination of exhaustion and excitement, they waited for my signal to take Aurelia Financial live. "Before we do this," I said, looking at each face in turn, "I want to thank you all. You believed in this vision when it was just an idea. You've worked impossible hours under impossible pressure. Whatever happens next, I'm proud of what we've built together." Jessica, who'd been coding for nearly 48 straight hours, raised her coffee mug. "To women who don't ask permission." "To financial freedom," Daria added. "To proving them wrong," Zoe said with a grin. Marcus lifted his mug. "To Aurelia." I nodded, throat tight with emotion. "Let's launch." With a few keystrokes, Jessica took our platform live. Marcus activated our social media campaign. Zoe published our website. Daria sent the press release to our media contacts. And just like that, Aurelia Financial existed in the world. For a moment, we sat in silence, waiting. Then Jessica's laptop pinged with a notification. "First user sign up," she announced, a hint of wonder in her voice. "Dorothy Miller from Evanston, Illinois." Another ping, then another, and another. "They're coming in faster than I can track," Jessica said after a few minutes, her eyes wide. "The social campaign is working." Marcus was monitoring the social feeds, his expression growing increasingly excited. The hashtag DAR, Financial Freedom for Women, is starting to trend in Chicago. The testimonial videos from our beta users are getting shared like crazy. My phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "You're on the homepage of TechCrunch. Female-founded fintech disrupts traditional wealth management." "You did it, girl. By noon, we'd surpassed our first-day sign-up projections by 300%. Business publications. We're running stories about the new player challenging the male-dominated financial services industry. Several women's magazines had reached out for interviews about our female-led team. We need to expand server capacity," Jessica announced, fingers flying over her keyboard. "We're getting more traffic than our projections anticipated." "Approved," I said without hesitation. "Whatever we need to keep up with demand." As the day progressed, a pattern emerged in the user data. Women weren't just signing up, they were engaging deeply with the platform, moving methodically through educational modules before exploring investment tools. They were uploading financial documents, connecting bank accounts, and setting concrete goals. "They're hungry for this," Zoe observed, reviewing the user journey analytics. "Look at these engagement metrics. They're not just browsing, they're committing." A knock at our office door interrupted the celebration. I looked up to see Daniel standing in the doorway, a cardboard box under one arm. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded and led him to my office, closing the door behind us. He set the box on a chair and stood awkwardly in the center of the room, hands in his pockets. "Congratulations on the launch," he said. "I've been following the coverage. It's impressive." "Thank you," I replied, perching on the edge of my desk. "And thank you for what you did in court yesterday. I know what it cost you." He shrugged, a gesture that attempted casual dismissal but couldn't quite hide the tension in his shoulders. It was the right thing to do. "What happened at R&M?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Exactly what you'd expect. James called an emergency partners meeting. They voted to remove me from the partnership, effective immediately. He gestured to the box. 15 years of work, packed up in 20 minutes. The weight of that sacrifice hung between us. I'm sorry, I said softly. Are you? He looked at me directly, his expression unreadable. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To force my hand? To make me choose? I straightened, feeling a flare of indignation. That's not fair. I never asked you to sacrifice your career. I only asked for your support, which meant opposing my partners. You knew they wouldn't tolerate that. So I should have abandoned my dreams to protect your partnership with a man who laughed in my face? A man who was willing to use our marriage as a legal weapon? Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. That's not what I'm saying. I never wanted to be caught in the middle of this. Neither did I replied. But James put us there the moment he dismissed me. And you kept us there by refusing to take a clear stand until you were forced to. He began to pace, his movements tight and controlled. Do you have any idea what this means for me? For us? My reputation in the industry is damaged. My income is gone. Our financial plans are changing, I finished for him. Yes, I understand that. But you're acting like I did this to you, when the truth is, James did this to both of us. He stopped, pacing, and looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in months. You're right, he said finally. This isn't your fault. I'm just processing. I softened, understanding the shock he must be feeling. What will you do now? I don't know. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking exhausted. I've had 3 calls from headhunters already. Word travels fast. But honestly, I don't know if I want another partnership at another firm with the same culture. My phone buzzed with a notification from our analytics dashboard. I glanced down to see that we'd crossed 5,000 signups. Your launch is going well, Daniel observed. Beyond our projections, I confirmed. Turns out there was a market after all. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. James always was terrible at identifying new opportunities. It's why we've been losing clients. The mention of R&M's troubles reminded me of what Patricia had told me. How bad is it over there, really? Patricia mentioned they'd lost some major clients. Daniel hesitated, old loyalties briefly surfacing, then seemed to remember he no longer owed the firm anything. Bad. They've lost 4 of their top 10 clients in the past year. The Harrington account was the biggest blow, $50 million under. Management, gone to Blackstone. The culture has been toxic for a while. James refuses to innovate, dismisses concerns about diversity, ignores changing market demands. Sounds like they have bigger problems than my little startup, I said. Your little startup hit them where it hurts, their blind spot. Daniel leaned forward. R&M has been ignoring women clients for years, even as studies show women are set to control 2/3 of consumer wealth in the next decade. James could have positioned the firm ahead of this trend, but instead... He laughed, I finished. He laughed, Daniel agreed. And now you're positioned to capture a market they've neglected. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. If James had taken my idea seriously, if he had welcomed me into Reynolds and Mitchell, Aurelia Financial might never have existed. His dismissal had created his competition. Daniel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. I should let you get back to your launch. I just wanted to... He trailed off, searching for words. Wanted to what? He turned, back to me. To tell you I'm proud of you, and to ask if we're going to be okay. The question hung in the air between us, layered with meaning. Were we okay as a couple? As individuals? What did our future look like now that everything had changed? I don't know, I answered honestly. Too much has happened too quickly. I think we both need time to figure out what comes next. He nodded slowly. I'm staying at the Palmer house for now. I thought you might want some space. I appreciate that, I said, surprised by his consideration. Let's check in a few days? When things settle? Okay. He picked up his box and moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it took me so long to stand up for you. I should have done it that first day, in the conference room. The admission touched something deep inside me, a wound that had been festering since James's laughter. Thank you for saying that. After he left, I returned to my team, pushing my personal complications aside to focus on the thrilling reality that Aurelia Financial was not just alive, but thriving. 3 weeks after our launch, we hit 25,000 users. The growth wasn't just in numbers, but in engagement depth. Women weren't simply signing up, they were actively using the platform, moving from educational content to actual investment activities, at a conversion rate that exceeded industry standards. Our office had expanded to accommodate 6 new hires: customer support specialists, another developer, and a data analyst. The exposed brick walls were now covered with whiteboards, tracking metrics and roadmaps for new features. Daria walked into my office one afternoon with a spreadsheet that made me blink twice to ensure I was seeing the numbers correctly. We've already reached our 6-month revenue projection, she announced, unable to contain her excitement. The premium subscription conversion rate is 23% compared to the industry average of 8%. That's incredible, I said, scanning the figures. What's driving it? Trust, Daria replied simply. Our users trust us. They see themselves reflected in our team, our messaging, our approach. They're not just buying a service, they're joining a movement. She was right. The community forums we'd built into the platform were buzzing with activity, women sharing financial wins, asking questions, supporting each other's goals. What had begun as a financial services platform was evolving into something more powerful. A community where women felt safe discussing money without judgment or condescension. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, my phone rang, with an unfamiliar number. Olivia Mitchell, I answered. Ms. Mitchell, this is Catherine Harrington. I believe you know my father, William Harrington. I nearly dropped the phone. William Harrington was one of the wealthiest investors in Chicago, the one whose account Daniel had mentioned R&M losing to Blackstone. Yes, of course, I managed. How can I help you, Ms. Harrington? I've been using Aurelia Financial for the past 2 weeks, and I'm impressed. Very impressed. The educational modules on tax strategies for generational wealth transfer were particularly enlightening. Thank you, I said, wondering where this was heading. I'd like to meet with you to discuss something. Are you available for lunch tomorrow? The next day, I found myself seated across from Catherine Harrington at Spia, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. In her early 40s, she exuded the quiet confidence of someone who had grown up with wealth but had earned her own success as a corporate attorney. I'll get straight to the point, she said after we'd ordered. My father is aging, and I'm taking over management of our family's investments. When I pulled our accounts from Reynolds and Mitchell last year, it was because I was tired of being patronized by James Reynolds. I nodded, understanding completely. We moved to Blackstone, but honestly, they're not much better. Different faces, same attitude. She leaned forward. What you've built with Aurelia is different. It respects women's intelligence while acknowledging the unique challenges we face in building and managing wealth. That was exactly our intention, I confirmed. I'd like to move a portion of our family portfolio to Aurelia. A test run, if you will. $20 million to start. She said it casually, as if discussing the weather rather than an amount that would transform our company overnight. I managed to maintain my composure, though my heart was racing. That's a substantial vote of confidence, Ms. Harrington. However, I should be transparent. We're currently structured for retail clients, not high net worth accounts of that size. She smiled. I'm aware, but I'm proposing something mutually beneficial. The Harrington account would anchor your expansion into wealth management services for high-net-worth women, a segment just as underserved as the retail clients you currently target. You're suggesting we accelerate our growth strategy, I said, quickly grasping the implications. Precisely. With our account as proof of concept, you could attract other women in similar positions. Women who control family wealth but feel sidelined by traditional firms. She sipped her water. My father's generation is dying out, Ms. Mitchell. Their daughters and widows are inheriting fortunes with little guidance from an industry that doesn't take them seriously. The opportunity was massive, but so were the challenges. Expanding into high-net-worth services would require additional licensing, compliance measures, and expertise. We'd need to build the infrastructure, I said thoughtfully. Hire the right team, ensure compliance. All of which requires capital, Catherine nodded. Which brings me to my second proposal. The Harrington family office would be interested in making a strategic investment in Aurelia Financial. By the time lunch ended, we had the framework of a deal. The Harrington family office would invest $10 million for a 15% stake in Aurelia, with Catherine joining our board of directors. The investment would fund our expansion into wealth management, services for high-net-worth women, with the Harrington portfolio as our first client. I walked back to our office in a daze, the city buzzing around me unnoticed as I processed the implications. In just 3 weeks, we'd gone from fighting to launch to entertaining an 8-figure investment, from being dismissed by Reynolds and Mitchell to potentially competing for their biggest clients. When I shared the news with my team, the reaction was a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This would change everything, Jessica said. We'd need to scale our technology, enhance security protocols, build new features. The compliance requirements for managing that much money are extensive, Daria added. We'd need specialized staff, different insurance coverage, regulatory filings. But it would validate our entire concept, Marcus pointed out. An endorsement from the Harrington family would open doors throughout the industry. Zoe, pragmatic as always, cut to the heart of the matter. The question is, do we want to grow this fast? We're only 3 weeks old. Most startups take years to attract this level of investment. I considered her question carefully. Growth for growth's sake isn't the goal. But if expanding allows us to serve more women at all wealth levels, then yes, I think it's worth the challenges. We spent the next week conducting due diligence, consulting with attorneys, and revising our business plan to incorporate the new direction. The Harrington investment would accelerate our timeline by at least 2 years, allowing us to build features and services we'd originally planned for much later. Throughout this whirlwind, Daniel and I maintained a cautious distance. He texted occasionally to check on me, and I responded with brief updates, but neither of us pushed for more. We were both navigating newly reconfigured lives, he figuring out his next professional step, me leading a company in hypergrowth. The night before, we were scheduled to finalize the Harrington deal. I worked late, reviewing the final terms with our attorneys. When I finally left the office around 10 p.m., the streets were quiet, Chicago's business district having emptied hours earlier. As I walked toward the parking garage, a familiar figure emerged from a nearby building, James Reynolds, looking considerably less polished than the last time I'd seen him. His tie was loosened, his expression haggard. He spotted me and froze momentarily before his face hardened into a mask of disdain. "Olivia," he said, his voice tight. "Enjoying your little victory lap?" I could have ignored him, could have walked past with the same dismissive attitude he'd always shown me. Instead, I stopped. "It's not a victory lap, James. It's a business. One that's serving clients you chose to ignore." He scoffed. "Please. You got lucky with some good press and a trendy angle. It won't last." "Is that what you tell yourself? That the 25,000 women using our platform are just following a trend?" I shook my head. "They're responding to being respected, perhaps for the first time in their financial lives. Something flashed across his face. Anger, certainly, but beneath it, a flicker of uncertainty. "You stole our strategy, our clients." "No, James. I built what you refused to see value in. And as for clients..." I debated whether to tell him about the Harrington deal, then decided against it. He would find out soon enough. "I'm serving a market you dismissed as not worth your time." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You think you've won, don't you? You think because you turned Daniel against the firm, because you've had a successful launch, that you've beaten me. But you have no idea what it takes to run a real financial firm. The regulations, the responsibilities, the relationships built over decades." I met his gaze steadily. "You're right about one thing. I don't know what it takes to run a firm like Reynolds and Mitchell, but I do know what it takes to build something new, something necessary. And I know that dismissing innovation is the first step toward irrelevance." His face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful..." "Good night, James," I interrupted, moving past him toward the garage. "Best of luck with the Prescott account. I hear they're reviewing their options." I left him standing there, his retort dying on his lips. I hadn't known about the Prescott account specifically, but Daniel had mentioned R&M was vulnerable with several other major clients. The flash of panic in James's eyes confirmed I'd hit a nerve. As I drove home, I reflected on how differently I felt from that day in the conference room when James had laughed at my idea. The humiliation had transformed into something powerful. Not just determination, but a bone-deep certainty that I was building something important. My phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. Daniel. "Hey," I answered, surprised. We hadn't spoken directly in over a week. "Hi," he said, his voice warm in the darkness of my car. "I just heard about the Harrington deal. Kathy called me." Of course. Daniel had been the Harrington account manager at R&M before they left. "You could have given me a heads up," he continued, but there was no accusation in his tone. Just amusement. "I wasn't sure it was real until today," I admitted. "And honestly, I wasn't sure where we stood." He was quiet. For a moment. "That's fair. Listen, I was wondering if you might want to have dinner tomorrow? To celebrate your deal. And to talk." The hesitation in his voice tugged at something in my chest. Despite everything, despite the distance and the hurt and the fundamental shifts in our relationship, there was still a connection between us. "I'd like that," I said softly. As I pulled into our building's garage, I realized something had changed. For weeks, I'd been defining myself in opposition to Reynolds and Mitchell, to James, even in some ways to Daniel. My success had been fueled partly by the desire to prove them wrong. But tonight, facing James, I'd felt no need to prove anything. My company's success spoke for itself. The validation I'd once craved from him, from the firm, from the industry, now seemed irrelevant compared to the satisfaction of building something that mattered. Tomorrow, we would sign the Harrington deal. Next week, we would begin expanding our services. The month after that, who knew? But for the first time since that fateful meeting, I was looking forward, not back. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Reynolds and Mitchell announces restructuring amid client departures. I smiled slightly as the doors closed. The consequences of underestimating women were just beginning to unfold. The private dining room at Alinea glowed with soft, ambient lighting as a waiter poured champagne into crystal flutes. Catherine Harrington raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said, "and to women taking their rightful place in finance." Our small group, the Aurelia team, our attorneys, and the Harrington family representatives, clinked glasses. The deal had been signed an hour earlier. $10 million for a 15% stake in Aurelia Financial, with the promise of moving $20 million in assets under our management once the infrastructure was in place. I still can't quite believe it, Jessica whispered to me as we sampled the first course, an artistic creation involving truffles and gold leaf. 6 weeks ago, we were fighting to launch. Now we're celebrating with the Harringtons. I squeezed her hand under the table. We earned this. Across the room, Catherine was deep in conversation with Daria about our expansion plans. At 43, Catherine represented exactly the type of client we hoped to serve. Accomplished women stepping into control of significant wealth who wanted sophisticated financial services without condescension. My phone vibrated discreetly, in my clutch. I checked it under the table. A text from Daniel. Still on for dinner tomorrow? I typed a quick response. Yes. Looking forward to it. The champagne, the decadent food, the weight of the signed contracts. All of it felt surreal. If someone had told me 6 months ago that James Reynolds' dismissive laughter would lead to this moment, I would never have believed them. After dinner, as we waited for our cars in the crisp autumn air, Catherine pulled me aside. You know what I love most about your platform? She asked. It's not just that it's designed for women. It's that it respects our intelligence while acknowledging the unique challenges we face. That was exactly our intention, I replied. Well, you nailed it. She handed me her card with a personal number scrawled on the back. Call me anytime. This is just the beginning, Olivia. We're going to upend this industry together. As my car pulled away, I leaned back against the leather seat and allowed myself to fully absorb the magnitude of what we'd accomplished. The Harrington investment wasn't just capital, it was validation at the highest level. It was a statement that Aurelia Financial wasn't just a niche player, but a legitimate force in the industry. I directed the driver to take me to the lakefront rather than home. Despite the late hour and the October chill, I needed a moment of stillness before returning to my empty apartment. Lake Michigan stretched before me like liquid obsidian, reflecting the city lights in fractured patterns. I walked along the water's edge, my heels sinking slightly into the damp sand, and thought about how drastically my life had changed since. That day in the Reynolds and Mitchell conference room, my phone buzzed again. Not Daniel this time, but Mia. Just saw the press release about the Harrington investment. You are a badass. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate? I smiled and replied, Can't. Tomorrow, having dinner with Daniel. Her response came instantly. Oh, the dinner? The what's happening with our marriage dinner? That's the one. Good luck. Call me after, no matter how late. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and looked out at the vast darkness of the lake. For weeks, I'd been so focused on Aurelia that I'd hardly had time to process what was happening with my marriage. Daniel and I had been circling each other cautiously, exchanging practical information about our shared life without addressing the fundamental questions. Where do we go from here? Can our relationship survive these seismic shifts? Tomorrow, we would finally have that conversation. The restaurant Daniel chose was neither Reynolds and Mitchell's usual power lunch spot, nor one of our regular date night destinations. It was a small Italian place in Lincoln Park, intimate without being romantic, quiet enough for serious conversation. He stood when I arrived, and I was struck by how different he looked. He'd grown a short beard, and his usual tailored suit had been replaced by dark jeans and a cashmere sweater. He looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in years, despite the uncertainty in his eyes. You look beautiful, he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Thank you. I settled into my chair, grateful I'd chosen a simple black dress rather than anything that might have seemed like I was trying too hard. You look different. Good different. He smiled ruefully, running a hand over his beard. Life as an unemployed, former finance executive has its perks. No more shaving every day. The waiter brought bread and took our wine order. When he left, an awkward silence settled between us. So, Daniel finally said, congratulations on the Harrington deal. It's huge, Olivia. Really huge. Thank you. I tore off a piece of bread. more for something to do with my hands than from hunger. It's still sinking in. I'm not surprised Catherine went with Aurelia. She was always frustrated by James's approach when her father was our client. He hesitated. I should have told you about her sooner. Introduced you. It might have saved us all a lot of drama. I considered this, then shook my head. I'm not sure that would have changed anything. James would still have laughed at my idea. And honestly, I needed to build Aurelia on my own terms, not through your connections. Daniel nodded slowly. You know, I've been thinking a lot about that day, when you presented to the partners. I keep replaying it, wondering what I could have done differently. You defended my idea, I pointed out. After James laughed. Not enough, he said quietly. I should have shut him down completely, should have made it clear his behavior was unacceptable. Instead, I tried to smooth things over, to keep the peace. The wine arrived, a rich Barolo that Daniel must have remembered was my favorite. We paused as the waiter poured and left. Peacekeeping has always been your default, I said, taking a sip. Between me and your family, between colleagues, it's part of what makes you good at client relations. But it's not always the right approach, he admitted. Especially not when someone I love is being disrespected. The word love hung in the air between us, a reminder of what was at stake in this conversation. What happened after the hearing? I asked. At the firm? Daniel swirled his wine, gathering his thoughts. It was ugly. James called an emergency partners meeting the moment we got back to the office. He presented my testimony as a betrayal of firm interests, claimed I had divided loyalties. He gave a bitter laugh. As if supporting my wife's right to pursue her own career was somehow a failure of character. And the other partners? Thomas tried to mediate, suggested a leave of absence rather than outright removal. But James had them convinced I was a liability. He shrugged. The vote was 4-1. Only Thomas opposed. The hurt was evident in his voice, the pain of being rejected by the firm he'd helped build. I reached across the table and touched his hand. I'm sorry. Despite everything, I know how much the firm meant to you. He turned his hand to hold mine, a small but significant gesture. The strange thing is, once the shock wore off, I felt relieved, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there. What do you mean? The culture at R&M has been toxic for years. The endless pursuit of bigger clients, bigger fees, bigger everything, without any consideration for ethics or innovation or diversity. I'd been going through the motions, telling myself I was bringing value to clients, but the truth is... He paused, looking troubled. The truth is, we weren't serving them as well as we could have been, as we should have been. This level of self-reflection from Daniel surprised me. He'd always been ambitious, driven, proud of his role at a prestigious firm. This newfound awareness suggested he'd been doing some serious soul-searching. So what now? I asked. Have you decided what's next for you professionally? He nodded. I've had offers. 3 firms have reached out with partnership tracks. The compensation would be comparable to R&M, maybe better. But? I sensed his hesitation, but they're all the same culture, same approach, same problems. He leaned forward, an intensity in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. I don't want to jump from one outdated firm to another. I've been thinking about something different. Like what? Consulting. Working with financial firms on modernization, diversification, digital transformation. All the things R&M refused to consider. He hesitated. And I've been talking to Thomas. Thomas? I was surprised. I thought he was staying at R&M. He resigned last week, after James pushed through some changes that would have compromised service to smaller clients. Daniel looked both troubled and energized. We're considering starting something together. Not a traditional wealth management firm, but an advisory practice focused on helping existing firms adapt to changing market demands. The irony wasn't lost on me. Daniel, who had been so cautious about my venture, was now contemplating his own entrepreneurial path. "That sounds perfect for you, actually," I said. "You always were the most client-focused partner at R&M." "Thank you." He squeezed my hand, then released it as our food arrived. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The tension between us had eased, but the most difficult conversation still lay ahead. "And what about us?" I finally asked, setting down my fork. "Where do we go from here, Daniel?" He met my eyes, his expression somber. "That depends on what you want, Olivia. These past weeks have given me time to think about what went wrong between us. Not just the R&M fiasco, but before that. And what conclusions did you reach?" "That somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you clearly." His voice was low, reflective. "When we met, I was in awe of your intelligence, your drive. I bragged to everyone about your success at Goldman. But after we moved to Chicago, after you took that step back from your career, I started to see you as my wife, not as the formidable professional you've always been." The admission hit me with unexpected force. It was one thing to sense this shift, another to hear him articulate it so clearly. "I never wanted you to put your ambitions on hold," he continued. "But I didn't fight for you at the firm the way I should have. And when you decided to build something on your own, I was too caught up in my own concerns to support you properly." "You were caught between your partnership and your marriage," I acknowledged. "It wasn't a fair position." "No, it wasn't. But that doesn't excuse my choices." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, Olivia, I'm proud of what you've built. And I'm ashamed it took me so long to stand by you publicly." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I've missed you," I admitted. "Not just these past weeks, but before that. I've missed the partnership we used to have, the way we used to challenge each other, support each other's dreams. I've missed that too." He reached for my hand again. "Do you think we could find our way back to that? Not immediately, but eventually?" The question was loaded with hope and fear in equal measure. Could we rebuild what had been damaged? Could we forge something new from the ashes of our old relationship? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "We're both different people now. I've changed. You've changed. Our circumstances have certainly changed." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Daniel suggested. "Maybe we needed to break out of the roles we'd fallen into, to remember who we are individually, before we can figure out who we are together." I considered this. "Are you saying we should date each other again? Get to know these new versions of ourselves?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Would that be so terrible? Dinner once a week, no pressure, no expectations. Just two people with a complicated history trying to see if there's still a future." The proposition was both terrifying and exhilarating. No guarantees, no safety net, just the possibility of rediscovery. "I'd like that," I said finally. "Let's try." Relief and hope flickered across his face. "I'll take it." 3 months later, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Chicago Peninsula Hotel, looking out at the 500 women gathered for Aurelia Financial's first annual Women in Wealth Summit. When I started Aurelia, I told the rapt audience, it was because I saw a gap in the market. Women controlling over $10 trillion in assets, yet consistently underserved by traditional financial institutions. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly that gap would be filled once we offered an alternative. The growth had been staggering. From our initial 25,000 users, we'd expanded to over 100,000. The Harrington investment had allowed us to build out our high net worth services division, which now managed nearly $80 million in assets, with another $120 million in the pipeline. Today, Aurelia serves women at every stage of their financial journey, from young professionals making their first investments, to executives managing seven-figure portfolios, to women overseeing multi-generational family wealth. What unites them all is the desire to be treated with respect, to have access to sophisticated financial tools, and to build security on their own terms. I scanned the audience, spotting familiar faces. Catherine Harrington at a front table, Mia beaming proudly from the side, my team scattered throughout the room. And at a table near the back, Daniel, watching me with undisguised admiration. Our weekly dinners had evolved into something unexpected, a genuine courtship sometimes. Awkward, often revealing, always honest. We were learning each other anew, without the baggage of old expectations. Some nights ended with just a kiss goodnight at the door of what was now officially my apartment. Others led to more, rekindling a physical connection that had never really been the problem. 2 days ago, he'd officially launched his new venture with Thomas, Mitchell and Wallace Advisory Group, specializing in helping traditional financial firms modernize their approach for the next generation of clients. Already, they had signed 3 mid-sized wealth management firms as clients. The financial world is changing, I continued, returning my focus to the audience. Women aren't just participating in that change, we're driving it. At Aurelia, we believe this is just the beginning of a fundamental shift in how wealth is managed, grown, and passed on. After my keynote, as attendees networked over cocktails, I found myself face-to-face with a woman I recognized from her press photos, Elaine Reynolds, James's wife. Mrs. Reynolds, I said, surprised. I didn't realize you were attending. Elaine, elegant in her mid-50s with a poised demeanor that showed traces of strain around the eyes, offered a tight smile. I registered under my maiden name, she explained. I was curious about what you've built. An awkward silence fell between us. I wasn't sure what to say to the wife of the man who had set this whole journey in motion with his dismissive laughter. Is it true? She finally asked, her voice low enough that nearby guests couldn't hear. That R&M is being acquired? The question caught me off guard. I'd heard rumors that Reynolds and Mitchell was in trouble, but acquisition talks were news to me. I'm not privy to R&M's business decisions, I said carefully. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. Of course, I just thought, given your connections, you might have heard something. I'm sorry, I haven't. Is everything all right? Elaine's composure slipped momentarily. James hasn't been himself lately. The firm's struggles have taken a toll. She straightened, regaining her poise. Your platform is impressive, Mrs. Mitchell. Perhaps if James had listened to you that day, things might have turned out differently for everyone. Before I could respond, she melted back into the crowd, leaving me with the unsettling realization that the ripple effects of our businesses extended far beyond balance sheets and client lists. They touched families, marriages, identities. Later, as the event wound down, Daniel approached with 2 glasses of champagne. To the woman of the hour, he said, handing me one. That was an incredible speech. Thank you. I took a grateful sip. Did you see Elaine Reynolds was here? His eyebrows shot up. James's wife. No, what did she want? I shrugged. I'm not entirely sure. She asked about rumors that R&M is being acquired. Daniel's expression turned serious. Thomas heard something similar from a contact at Goldman. Apparently, Meridian Capital is looking at absorbing them at a significant discount. That's not how James envisioned his legacy, I said, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Not quite sympathy, but not the vindication I might have expected either. No, Daniel agreed. But it's what happens when you refuse to evolve, when you dismiss new ideas because they challenge your worldview. He gave me a meaningful look. Some of us were fortunate enough to learn that lesson before it was too late. I smiled, touched by the personal growth reflected in his words. Speaking of evolution, how's the new venture going? Promising. We signed Westbrook Partners yesterday. They want a complete overhaul of their client onboarding process and digital presence. His eyes crinkled with genuine excitement. And they specifically asked for strategies to better serve their female clients. I suggested they send representatives to your summit today. I spotted a group of people across the room wearing Westbrook Partners name tags. Looks like they took your advice. They'd be fools not to. Daniel hesitated, then added, Actually, I've been thinking there might be opportunities for collaboration between our firms, complementary services, referral arrangements, if you're interested. The proposition held layers of meaning. Professional collaboration, partnership of a different kind, a path, forward together, but one that respected our individual journeys. I'd be open to discussing it, I said. Over dinner next week? He smiled, relief evident in his expression. It's a date. As we clinked glasses, I reflected on the strange, winding path that had led us here. 6 months ago, a dismissive laugh had shattered my confidence momentarily, only to forge it into something stronger. That laugh had cost James his firm's future, had transformed Daniel's career path, had launched me into a new life I couldn't have imagined. Across the ballroom, 500 women were networking, sharing knowledge, building connections, all on a platform that existed because one man couldn't see past his own biases to recognize a brilliant opportunity. I caught Catherine Harrington's eye across the room, and she raised her glass to me with a knowing smile. We both understood what this moment represented, not just the success of one company, but the beginning of a shift that would ripple through the entire industry. As I raised my glass in return, I silently thanked James Reynolds for his laughter. It had been the push I needed to build something far greater than a seat at his table. I had built my own. Aurelia Financial acquires Longview Analytics. The headline stretched across the top of the business section of the Chicago Tribune 1 year after our launch. I traced my fingers over the words, still not quite believing how far we'd come. 16 months after James Reynolds laughed at my idea, Aurelia had grown from a concept to a financial powerhouse managing over $300 million in assets. The acquisition of Longview, a boutique data analytics firm specializing in financial behavior patterns, represented our first major expansion beyond our core services. The champagne's chilled, Jessica announced, entering my office with Daria and Marcus in tow. She placed a bottle and 4 glasses on my desk. Zoe's on her way up. My office was no longer in the original West Loop loft. We'd moved to a full floor in a gleaming tower along the Chicago River 4 months earlier, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. The exposed brick had been replaced by sleek, modern design, though I'd insisted on keeping elements that reflected our startup roots. A massive whiteboard in the main conference room still displayed our original mission statement. Should we wait for Zoe? Daria asked, eyeing the champagne. I'm here, Zoe rushed in, slightly breathless. At 27, our UX designer had blossomed into a confident leader, now heading a team of 6 designers ensuring Aurelia's platform remained, both sophisticated and accessible. Smiled at the 4 people who had taken a chance on my vision when it was nothing more than an idea born of humiliation. None of this would have been possible without you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You believed in Aurelia when it was just a concept on paper. Best career decision I ever made, Jessica said as she popped the cork. Though I still have nightmares about those 48-hour coding sessions before launch. We laughed, remembering the frantic early days when we worked elbow to elbow in our tiny office, fueled by passion and coffee. To Aurelia, I toasted, raising my glass. And to the team that made it happen. To Aurelia, they echoed. After they left, I turned back to the newspaper article. The business reporter had done her homework, detailing not just the acquisition, but Aurelia's meteoric rise in the financial services industry. The firm has captured a previously underserved market segment, women at various stages of wealth, accumulation, by combining sophisticated financial tools with education and community building. Industry analysts note that Aurelia's user engagement metrics are unprecedented, with clients spending an average of 40 minutes per session on the Tide platform compared to the industry standard of 8 to 12 minutes. The article continued. The acquisition of Longview Analytics signals Aurelia's move into predictive financial modeling, potentially allowing them to offer increasingly personalized investment strategies. This comes as traditional firms scramble to catch up, with several launching women-focused initiatives that critics describe as too little, too late. My eye caught the final paragraph. Meanwhile, once prominent Reynolds and Mitchell Financial Consulting continues to struggle following its acquisition by Meridian Capital last quarter. Sources close to the situation report that most of R&M's legacy clients have moved their accounts elsewhere, and former managing partner James Reynolds is no longer with the firm. I set down the paper, unsure how to feel about James's downfall. There was no satisfaction in it, just a sense of inevitability. His refusal to evolve, to see the changing landscape of wealth management, had sealed his fate long before I presented my idea in that conference room. My phone buzzed with a text. From Daniel. Congratulations on Longview. Just saw the Tribune? Dinner tonight to celebrate? I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. Your place or mine? His response came quickly. Mine. I have a surprise. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. The weekly dates had gradually increased in frequency, each of us rediscovering aspects of the other we'd forgotten or never fully appreciated. We maintained separate residences. I kept the penthouse. He'd bought a renovated loft in Printer's Row, which gave us both the space to develop our independent lives while exploring our renewed connection. Daniel's venture with Thomas had flourished in parallel with Aurelia's growth. Mitchell & Wallace Advisory had found a profitable niche helping traditional financial firms modernize their approach, with a particular emphasis on digital transformation and inclusive service models. They now employed 18 consultants and had a client list that included some of the most established names in finance. Our professional lives remained mostly separate, though we'd established a referral arrangement that benefited both our firms. More importantly, we'd learned to be genuinely supportive of each other's ambitions, celebrating successes and providing perspective during challenges. Later that evening, I arrived at Daniel's loft to find the dining table elegantly set with candles and flowers. The aroma of something delicious filled the space. You cooked? I asked, surprised. Daniel had never been particularly interested in culinary pursuits during our marriage. He grinned, looking boyish despite the silver at his temples. I've been taking classes, Italian cuisine. He handed me a glass of wine, part of my ongoing self-improvement project. I accepted the wine, taking in the changes in his home since my last visit. New art on the walls, shelves filled with cookbooks, and philosophy texts, a yoga mat rolled up in the corner. This version of Daniel, more reflective, more balanced, continued to surprise me. The acquisition made quite a splash, he said as he stirred something on the stove. Longview is an excellent strategic fit. Their predictive models are incredible. I agreed. We've already integrated some of their algorithms into our platform. The personalization capabilities are beyond anything else in the market. He nodded. Smart move. The future of wealth management is hyper-personalization. That's what Catherine Harrington keeps saying. She's been our biggest advocate, introducing us to her entire network. I sipped my wine. Speaking of which, how's the Westbrook project going? We delivered the final phase last week. Their new digital platform launches next month. He hesitated. Actually, that's partly what I wanted to talk to you about tonight. Something in his tone caught my attention. Oh, I've been approached by Meridian Capital, he said carefully. They want Mitchell & Wallace to overhaul what remains of R&M's client services division. I set down my glass. That's ironic. Very. He turned to face me fully. I haven't given them an answer yet. Wanted to discuss it with you first, given the history. The consideration touched me. A year ago, Daniel might have made this decision independently, worried about the professional implications rather than the personal ones. How do you feel about it? I asked. He leaned against the counter, thoughtful. Professionally, it's an intriguing challenge. They've retained some valuable parts of R&M's business, but the culture is toxic, the system's outdated. It would be a complete rebuild. He paused. Personally? There's a certain poetic justice in being asked to fix what James broke. And James? Is he still involved at all? No. He was pushed out after the acquisition. Last I heard, he's struggling to rebuild his client list as an independent advisor. I absorbed this information, searching for any lingering resentment and finding none. I think you should take it, I said finally. If it makes business sense for Mitchell and Wallace. You're sure it wouldn't be uncomfortable for you? Given everything, I'm beyond that now, Daniel. And I realized as I said it that it was true. The hurt and humiliation that had once driven me had transformed into something healthier. Determination, yes, but also a genuine desire to change the industry for the better. Besides, you're particularly qualified to understand what went wrong there and how to fix it. He smiled warmly. That's what I thought you'd say. Thank you. As we sat down to dinner, a remarkably good risotto with wild mushrooms, Daniel reached for something on the sideboard. I mentioned I had a surprise, he said, sliding a folder across the table. I opened it to find preliminary architectural renderings of a building. What am I looking at? The future home of the Chicago Financial Education Center, he explained, a note of excitement in his voice. A joint initiative I'm developing with Northwestern's business school. The idea is to create a space where financial literacy programs can be offered to underserved communities, with special emphasis on women and minorities. I flipped through the renderings, impressed by the vision. Classrooms, conference spaces, technology labs, all designed to make financial education accessible and engaging. This is amazing, I said sincerely. When did you start working on this? About 6 months ago. It started as a conversation with one of my former clients who's on Northwestern's board. His eyes lit up as he described the program structure. We'll offer everything from basic budgeting workshops to advanced investment strategy seminars, all free of charge, funded by corporate sponsors and private donors. As he spoke, I was struck by how much he'd changed. The Daniel I married had been ambitious and client-focused, but primarily within the traditional frameworks of wealth management. This project represented something different, a desire to create systemic change, to democratize financial knowledge. Love it, I said when he finished. Is there a way Aurelia could get involved? I was hoping you'd ask that. He reached for my hand across the table. Actually, I was thinking you might consider joining the advisory board. Your perspective would be invaluable. The request surprised me. You want me on the board? Professionally? Who better? He asked simply. You've built a company that's revolutionizing how women interact with financial services. Your insights would help shape the center's approach. I squeezed his hand, touched by his confidence in me. I'd be honored. After dinner, we moved to his balcony with glasses of port, watching the city lights shimmer against the night sky. The conversation flowed easily between professional developments and personal reflections, the boundaries between those spheres increasingly blurred as our lives reintegrated. I saw Mia last week, Daniel mentioned. She said you're considering opening a New York office. I nodded. The East Coast market is too significant to ignore. We're looking at spaces in Midtown. That would mean a lot of travel for you. For a while, yes. I studied his expression. Would that be a problem? He considered this. A year ago, it might have been. I'd have worried about what it meant for us, about maintaining control of the situation. He smiled ruefully. I've learned a few things since then, such as that trying to contain you is like trying to hold water in your hands. The tighter you grip, the more you lose. He looked at me directly. I'm not interested in holding you back anymore, Olivia. I want to see how far you can go. The statement hung in the air between us, profound in its simplicity. It was perhaps the most genuine expression of love he'd offered since our reconciliation began. Not passionate declarations or grand gestures, but the promise of support without constraints. There's something else I wanted to discuss, he said, setting down his glass. I've been thinking about our living arrangements. My heart skipped a beat. Were we moving too fast? The separate residences had been working well, giving us both the independence we needed. What about them? I asked carefully. I'm not suggesting we change anything immediately, he clarified, reading my hesitation. But I wondered if you'd consider looking at properties together. Not to move in right away, but as a future possibility. Something we could design together that reflects who we are now, not who we were. The thoughtfulness of the proposal touched me. Not a return to our old dynamic, but the creation of something new. A space that would honor our individual journeys while creating room for a shared future. I'd like that, I said softly. He smiled, relief evident in his expression. Good. I've had some ideas. My phone rang, interrupting the moment. I normally would have ignored it, but the caller ID showed Catherine Harrington's name. I should take this, I said apologetically. Catherine never calls this late unless it's important. Daniel nodded, understanding as I answered. Olivia, I'm sorry to disturb your evening, Catherine said, her voice tense. But I've just received some information I thought you should know immediately. What is it? James Reynolds approached my father today. He's trying to raise capital for a new venture, a financial services platform specifically targeting women. She paused. He's positioning it as Aurelia, but better. Using your success as proof of concept while claiming he can execute the idea more effectively. A cold knot formed in my stomach. He's trying to copy Aurelia? Essentially, yes. He told my father he's already secured commitments from several investors, including 2 of your former beta users. I felt Daniel's concerned gaze as my expression darkened. Thank you for letting me know, Catherine. I appreciate the heads up. After ending the call, I relayed the conversation to Daniel, watching his face shift from surprise to indignation. The audacity is breathtaking, he said, shaking his head. After laughing at your idea, after trying to block your launch with legal action, he's now attempting to copy your success? I stood and walked to the railing, looking out at the city as I processed this development. James, having lost everything, due to his own short-sightedness, was now trying to rebuild by appropriating the very concept he had dismissed. What are you thinking? Daniel asked, coming to stand beside me. I turned to him, my initial anger giving way to strategic calculation. I'm thinking it's time for Aurelia to accelerate our expansion plans. We've been conservative, focusing on organic growth. But if James is entering the market, you need to solidify your position, Daniel finished. Expand your footprint. Enhance your offerings. Raise your profile. Exactly. My mind was already racing with possibilities. We've been considering a mobile app with enhanced functionality, developing more specialized services for women entrepreneurs, exploring international markets. All ideas worth fast-tracking, Daniel agreed. But don't let James drive your strategy. Remember, you have a 16-month head start, a proven platform, and a loyal user base. He has, what? A concept and some desperate pitches to investors? Perspective helped ground me. You're right. This isn't about him. It's about staying true to our vision while remaining vigilant. That's my Olivia, he said with a proud smile. Always focused on the horizon, not the rearview mirror. My Olivia. The simple phrase warmed me even as I continued strategizing. Would it help to get some intelligence on exactly what he's planning? Daniel asked. I still have contacts who might know details. I considered this, then shook my head. No, I don't want to give him that much importance. We'll proceed with our plans, perhaps with increased urgency, but not because we're afraid of James Reynolds. I smiled suddenly. Besides, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, isn't it? Daniel laughed. Indeed it is, and if anyone can turn this challenge into an opportunity, it's you. His confidence bolstered me, reminding me how far we'd both come. The old Daniel might have tried to protect me, to handle the situation himself. The old Olivia might have been shaken by James's attempt to encroach on her territory. Instead, we stood side by side, equals facing a challenge together. Him offering support without taking over, me accepting his perspective without surrendering. My agency, I said thoughtfully. In a strange way, we owed James a debt of gratitude. Daniel raised an eyebrow. How do you figure? If he hadn't laughed at my idea that day, Aurelia might never have existed. You might still be at R&M, trapped in a culture that was slowly suffocating your values. We might still be in our old pattern, with me subordinating my ambitions to your career. A butterfly effect from one moment of arrogance, Daniel mused. Exactly. His dismissal set everything in motion. Aurelia's creation, your partnership with Thomas, our relationship reset. I shook my head, marveling at the interconnectedness of it all. And now he's inadvertently giving us the push to elevate Aurelia to the next level. Daniel raised his glass. To James Reynolds, then. May his new venture serve as the perfect foil to highlight everything Aurelia does right. I clinked my glass against his, laughing at the irony. To James, the man who underestimated me twice. 3 weeks later, I stood on a stage in New York's World Trade Center, addressing the Women in Finance Summit. The audience of nearly 1,000 represented the industry's most influential women, executives, fund managers, analysts, entrepreneurs. Financial empowerment isn't just about accessing investment tools, I told them. It's about transforming the entire conversation around women and wealth. For too long, our industry has approached women as a niche market, a special interest, group with simplified needs. I gestured to the data displayed on the massive screen behind me. Charts showing women's growing economic power, their different investment patterns, their longer lifespans and unique financial challenges. At Aurelia, we recognize that women don't need financial services dumbed down. They need them smartly tailored to their actual lives and goals. They need advisors who understand that career interruptions for caregiving impact retirement planning. They need investment strategies that acknowledge women's typically longer lifespans and different risk profiles. I paused, scanning the attentive faces. And here's what we discovered. When you build financial services that truly respect women's intelligence and address their specific needs, you don't just create a successful niche product. You create a new paradigm that ultimately benefits everyone. The presentation continued with demonstrations of Aurelia's newest features. The mobile app we'd fast-tracked, the enhanced educational modules, the specialized services for women entrepreneurs. I announced our expansion to New York, with offices, opening the following month, and our plans to launch in London by year's end. I made no mention of competition, of James Reynolds' attempts to enter our market. His efforts to secure funding had stalled after several potential investors reached out to Aurelia users for due diligence and received enthusiastic testimonials about our platform. After the presentation, as I mingled with attendees at the reception, a reporter from Bloomberg approached. Ms. Mitchell, congratulations on Aurelia's continued expansion, she began. I wondered if you'd care to comment on James Reynolds' recent announcement of a competing platform called Artemis Financial? Some are calling it an Aurelia copycat. I smiled calmly. I believe innovation benefits the entire industry. If Aurelia's success has inspired others to better serve women investors, that's a win for everyone. especially the women who have been underserved for too long. But given your history with Mr. Reynolds, she pressed. I'm focused on Aurelia's future, not the past, I interrupted gently. Our mission has always been to transform how women build and manage wealth. That mission remains unchanged, regardless of the competitive landscape. The reporter seemed disappointed by my diplomatic response, clearly hoping for a more dramatic quote. She tried one more angle. Sources say Reynolds and Mitchell initially dismissed your concept when you presented it to them. How does it feel to see your former detractors now attempting to imitate your success? I paused, considering how best to respond. The truth was, I felt no resentment toward James anymore, only a kind of bemused pity for a man who had failed to recognize opportunity until it was too late. Sometimes innovation comes from unexpected places, I said finally. The most valuable ideas are often those initially dismissed as insignificant. That's a lesson I hope the entire financial industry takes to heart, not just about Aurelia, but about the power of diversity in all its forms. As the reporter departed, I felt a hand at the small of my back. Daniel had flown in for my presentation, a gesture of support that meant more than he knew. Perfect response, he murmured. Gracious yet pointed. I've had a lot of practice navigating loaded questions lately, I said with a small smile. The media loves the David and Goliath narrative, especially with the gender component. Well, David looks stunning today, he said, his eyes warm with admiration for my tailored power suit. Ready to head out? We have dinner reservations at Jean-Georges. As we made our way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and exchanging business cards, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From that moment of humiliation in the Reynolds and Mitchell conference room to this, Aurelia ascendant, our relationship renewed on healthier terms, both of us leading ventures that aligned with our values. Outside, New York hummed with energy in the early evening light. Daniel took my hand as we walked, a simple gesture that felt both familiar and new. I forgot to tell you, he said as we strolled toward Fifth Avenue. Thomas heard from a contact at Goldman that Artemis Financial's initial funding round fell through. James couldn't secure the minimum commitment. I nodded, unsurprised. The market has already spoken. Women aren't interested in services created by someone who fundamentally underestimated them. Speaking of market response, Daniel continued, the waiting list for the Chicago Financial Education Center's first workshop series is already at capacity. Turns out there's enormous demand for financial literacy programs, especially among young women. His enthusiasm for the project warmed me. We'd spent hours discussing the curriculum, the teaching approach, the metrics for success. His commitment to democratizing financial knowledge matched my own passion for empowering women through financial independence. I still can't believe we're here, I said as we paused at a corner, the city lights beginning to glimmer around us. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just accepted James's dismissal that day. If I'd swallowed my humiliation and continued waiting for a seat at their table. Daniel squeezed my hand. You would have found your way eventually. The vision you had for Aurelia was too powerful to stay dormant forever. Maybe, I acknowledged. But the path might have been very different. We might have been very different. He nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in my words. Our individual journeys had shaped us into people who could truly see and value each other, not just as husband and wife, but as equals with complementary strengths and shared values. I like who we are now, he said simply. As we continued towards the restaurant, I silently thanked James Reynolds for his dismissive laughter that day. In trying to diminish me, he had instead catalyzed my greatest achievement, not just Aurelia's success, but my own evolution into someone who would never again wait for permission to claim her power. Sometimes humiliation is just enlightenment, with growing pains. And sometimes, the people who laugh at your ideas become the cautionary tales in your success story. 2 years to the day after James Reynolds laughed at my idea, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of Chicago's Four Seasons Hotel, addressing the attendees of Aurelia Financial's second annual Women and Wealth Summit. When we gathered for our inaugural summit last year, I said to the crowd of nearly 800 women, Aurelia was managing just under $80 million in assets. Today, that figure stands at $1.2 billion. A round of applause rippled through the audience. The growth had exceeded even our most optimistic projections, fueled by our expanding suite of services and the seemingly endless demand from women seeking financial services that truly understood their needs. Our expansion into New York and London has connected us with women investors across 3 continents. Our mobile app has brought financial education to over 250,000 users, and our partnerships with universities and nonprofits have created pathways to financial literacy for thousands of women who previously had limited access to investment resources. From my vantage point on the stage, I could see my core team seated at the front table, Jessica, Daria, Marcus, and Zoe, all now heading departments of their own within our rapidly growing company. Behind them sat Catherine Harrington, who had become not just a client, but a trusted advisor and friend. And at a table toward the back, Daniel and Thomas, representing Mitchell and Wallace, which had become the industry's leading consultancy for financial firms seeking to modernize their approach. But Aurelia's most significant achievement isn't measured in assets under management or user acquisition metrics, I continued. It's measured in the changed conversation around women and wealth. 2 years ago, women were still treated as a niche market by the financial industry. Today, every major firm has been forced to recognize women investors not as an afterthought, but as the future. I paused, scanning the attentive faces. And that, more than any balance sheet figure, is what true disruption looks like. After the keynote, as attendees networked over coffee, I found myself approached by a woman I recognized immediately, despite having never met her, Elizabeth Reynolds, James's daughter. In her early 30s, she had her father's confident bearing, but none of his arrogance. Ms. Mitchell, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for an inspiring presentation. I've been following Aurelia's growth since the beginning. Thank you, Elizabeth, I replied, shaking her hand. I'm surprised to see you here. A small smile played at her lips. I imagine you would be, given the history. May I speak with you? Privately for a moment? Curious, I led her to a quiet corner of the ballroom. Elizabeth carried herself with poise, dressed impeccably in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of old money restraint rather than ostentatious wealth. I wanted to meet you in person, she began, partly to apologize for my father's behavior 2 years ago, and partly to discuss a professional matter. No apology necessary, I assured her. You're not responsible for your father's actions. Perhaps not, she agreed. But as the new CEO of what remains of Reynolds Financial, I feel some obligation to address the past before proposing a future collaboration. I tried to mask my surprise. You're leading your father's new firm, Elizabeth? Nodded. After Meridian acquired R&M and then essentially dismantled it, my father attempted to rebuild with Artemis Financial. When that failed to secure funding, he approached me. I was a partner at Goldman's wealth management division at the time. And you agreed to join him? I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. Not exactly, she said with a hint of amusement. I agreed to acquire the remnants of his client list and restructure the firm entirely, on the condition that he step aside completely. The boldness of the move impressed me. That must have been a difficult conversation. Necessary, though, Elizabeth replied. The Reynolds name still carried some weight in certain circles, but the firm needed a complete overhaul in approach, culture, and services offered. She met my gaze directly. Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you. I'm listening. Reynolds Financial is rebuilding with a focus on intergenerational wealth transfer, specifically, preparing the next generation of wealthy women to manage family assets effectively. She handed me a sleek business card, We've developed some innovative approaches to family financial education, but we lack the technological platform to scale these services. I began to see where this was heading. And Aurelia has the platform but hasn't focused specifically on intergenerational education. Exactly. Her eyes lit up with genuine enthusiasm. I'm proposing a strategic partnership, not a merger, but a collaborative initiative combining Reynolds Financial's educational curriculum with Aurelia's technological infrastructure. The irony wasn't lost on me. James Reynolds had laughed at my idea. Now his daughter was proposing we join forces. It's an interesting concept, I acknowledged. But I have to ask, does your father know you're approaching me with this? A shadow crossed her face. My father is no longer involved in any business decisions. The stroke he suffered 6 months ago has significantly impaired his cognitive function. The news hit me unexpectedly. For so long, James had been the villain in my professional narrative, the embodiment of the old guard that refused to see women's potential. Learning of his diminished state stirred complicated emotions. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. Elizabeth nodded her thanks. It's been difficult for the family, but in some ways it's also brought clarity. The firm needed to evolve or die. I chose evolution. I studied her, recognizing something of myself in her determination to forge her own path. Send me a formal proposal, I said finally. We'll give it serious consideration. Relief and excitement flickered across her features. Thank you. That's all I ask. As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of symmetry. 2 years ago, I had pitched my idea in a Reynolds and Mitchell conference room only to be dismissed. Now, a Reynolds was pitching me, seeking my approval and partnership. Life had a peculiar way of coming full circle. That evening, Daniel and I hosted a dinner at our newly purchased home, a converted warehouse in Lincoln Park with soaring ceilings, expansive windows, and a rooftop garden overlooking the city. We'd spent months working with architects to create a space that reflected our individual tastes while accommodating our shared life. His love of classic architecture balanced by my preference for modern design, separate office spaces connected by a library we both treasured. The dinner celebrated not just the summit's success, but the 2-year anniversary of Aurelia's launch. Around our table sat the original team and their partners, Catherine Harrington, Thomas and his wife, and a few key employees who had joined in the early months. I propose a toast, Catherine announced, raising her glass as dessert was served, to Olivia, whose vision has transformed not just her own life, but the financial landscape for women everywhere. And to the team, I added quickly, who took that vision and made it a reality far beyond what I could have imagined. Glasses clinked amid warm laughter and conversation. The evening had that comfortable glow of people who had weathered challenges together and emerged stronger for it. After dinner, as our guests scattered throughout the house in smaller conversation groups, Daniel found me on the rooftop, gazing at the Chicago skyline. Elizabeth Reynolds approached you today, he said, joining me at the railing. Not a question, but a statement. News travels fast, I observed with a smile. Catherine mentioned it. She seemed intrigued by the idea of a partnership. I turned to face him, curious about his reaction. What do you think? You know better than anyone what the Reynolds name represents in this industry. Daniel considered this, his expression thoughtful. The name still carries weight, especially with older clients. But from what I've heard, Elizabeth is nothing like her father. She's built a solid reputation at Goldman. Innovative, collaborative, genuinely committed to diversity. She wants to focus on intergenerational wealth transfer, preparing the next generation of women to manage family assets, I explained. It's a natural extension of what we're already doing, but with a more specialized focus. It could be valuable, he agreed. The greatest transfer of wealth in history is happening right now as baby boomers age. And most of that wealth will ultimately end up in women's hands, either through inheritance or longevity. I leaned against the railing, absorbing the city lights. There's a certain poetic justice to it, isn't there? Partnering with a Reynolds to further expand Aurelia's impact. Daniel smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way I'd always loved. Life rarely offers such perfect symmetry. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the evening breeze carrying the distant sounds of the city. I had another interesting conversation today, I said finally. With Landmark Ventures. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Landmark was one of the most prestigious venture capital firms in the country, known for making strategic investments in fintech companies with significant growth potential. They're interested in leading our Series B funding round, I continued. They've proposed an investment that would value Aurelia at $850 million. He let out a low whistle. That's substantial. It would allow us to accelerate our international expansion, enhance our technology infrastructure, and potentially make strategic acquisitions of our own. I hesitated. But it would also mean bringing in significant outside influence for the first time. Until now, Aurelia had maintained relatively tight control over its direction, with the Harrington investment being more strategic partnership than typical venture funding. A major VC round would change the company's dynamics, introducing new pressures and expectations. "What's your instinct?" Daniel asked. I appreciated that he didn't immediately jump to advice or analysis, but instead wanted to understand my own thinking. Another evolution in our relationship. Part of me wants to maintain the control we've had, I admitted. The freedom to make decisions based on our vision, not quarterly targets. But another part recognizes that to truly transform this industry, we need to operate at a scale that requires significant capital. Daniel nodded, understanding the dilemma. It's the classic founder's challenge, balancing the purity of the vision against the resources needed to fully realize it. Exactly. I turned to look at him directly. What would you do? He considered the question seriously. I'd ensure the terms give you continued control over the company's core mission and values. Landmark has a reputation for being hands-off. With successful founders, but get everything in writing. He paused. Beyond that, I'd trust your instincts, Olivia. They've gotten you this far. His confidence in me never failed to strengthen my own resolve. I have the term sheet meeting tomorrow. I'll focus on maintaining control of our strategic direction while leveraging their capital to expand our impact. He reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers. You've built something remarkable, you know. Something that's changing women's lives in tangible ways. The genuine admiration in his voice touched me deeply. There had been a time when I'd craved this recognition from him, when I'd felt invisible in his professional orbit. Now, having earned it through my own path, it meant more than I could express. We both have, I said, thinking of his education center, which had already served over 5,000 women with free financial literacy programs. Different approaches, same goal. The door to the rooftop opened, and Jessica appeared. Sorry to interrupt, but Catherine is preparing to leave and wanted to say goodbye. We followed her downstairs, where the party was winding down. As guests departed with warm hugs and promises to meet again soon, I found myself reflecting on how my personal and professional circles had evolved. 2 years ago, I'd felt excluded from the financial world that Daniel inhabited so comfortably. Now I stood at the center of my own ecosystem of colleagues, mentors, and friends who respected me not as Daniel's wife, but as a force in my own right. After the last guest departed, Daniel and I moved through our home, collecting glasses and plates in comfortable silence. This domestic rhythm had returned to our lives gradually over the past year as we cautiously reunited, first sharing occasional dinners, then weekends, and finally, 6 months ago, deciding to find a home together that would represent our new beginning. I met with a potential client today, Daniel said as we loaded the dishwasher. A regional bank looking to overhaul their wealth management division. Specifically, they want to better serve women clients. I smiled. Another one? That's the third this month. The market has finally caught on, he confirmed. Everyone's scrambling to adapt to what you identified 2 years ago. Most are doing it badly. Pink websites, condescending language, the works. The shrink it and pink it approach, I said with a shake of my head. As if changing the color scheme without addressing the fundamental service model would suddenly attract women investors. Exactly. That's why they're coming to us. They've seen what Aurelia has accomplished and want to understand the secret. He closed the dishwasher and leaned against the counter. Of course, I tell them the secret is actually listening to women about what they want, rather than assuming you already know. Revolutionary concept, I teased. Indeed. His expression grew more serious. It's fascinating, watching the industry transform. When we were at R&M, change came at a glacial pace. Now firms are falling over themselves to evolve. Fear is a powerful motivator, I observed. They've seen the numbers. Women control $10 trillion in U.S. household financial assets now, projected to reach $30 trillion in the next decade as wealth transfers between generations. Any firm that can't effectively serve women clients won't survive. Daniel nodded. James always dismissed those projections, called them speculative feminist propaganda. The mention of James reminded me of Elizabeth's revelation about his stroke. Speaking of James, did you know about his health issues? Daniel's expression softened. I heard rumors. Thomas got a call from an old colleague mentioning James had been hospitalized, but I didn't know the details. Elizabeth said he had a stroke 6 months ago. Significant cognitive impairment. I found myself feeling an unexpected sorrow for the man who had once been my adversary. It's strange. I spent so long seeing him as this powerful obstacle, this embodiment of everything wrong with the industry. And now he's just a man facing his mortality, like anyone else. Daniel finished quietly. We fell silent, both contemplating the strange turns life could take. James had gone from powerful partner to cautionary tale in the span of 2 years. A man whose inability to recognize the changing landscape had cost him everything he'd built. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he'd embraced your idea that day? Daniel asked. If instead of laughing, he'd said, "Let's do this"? I'd thought about this often, especially in the early days of Aurelia. R&M would probably be thriving instead of dismantled. You'd still be a partner there. I might be heading their women's division. I met his eyes. We'd likely still be in our old pattern, you the primary breadwinner, me the supportive spouse with a nice little project at your firm. When you put it that way, Daniel said with a wry smile, perhaps James did us both a favor. He did, I agreed. His laugh set us free. Me to build something authentic. You to rediscover what really matters to you professionally. I moved closer, resting my hand on his chest. And us to rebuild something stronger between us. He covered my hand with his, from the ashes of my partnership and our old marriage, phoenix-like. The poetic phrasing made me smile. Look at you, getting philosophical in your old age. 40 is hardly old, he protested, pulling me closer. Though I admit, I'm wiser than... I was at 38. Oh? And what wisdom have you acquired? His expression grew serious. That real partnership isn't about protecting or directing. It's about standing alongside someone as they forge their own path, offering support without trying to control the outcome. The simple truth of it resonated deeply. I've gained some wisdom too, I admitted. That success means nothing if you sacrifice who you are to achieve it. And that sometimes, the people who underestimate you are giving you the greatest gift possible, the freedom to prove them wrong. Daniel brushed a strand of hair from my face, his touch gentle. Would you change anything? If you could go back to that day in the conference room? I considered the question, thinking of all that had transpired since, the struggles and triumphs, the growth and transformation, the rebuilt relationship that bore little resemblance to the marriage we'd had before. Not a thing, I said firmly, though I might thank James for his laughter. 3 months later, I sat in Aurelia's Chicago headquarters, now occupying 3 full floors of a prestigious Michigan Avenue address. Across from me sat Elizabeth Reynolds, her team of 3 executives, and a representative from their legal department. On my side were Jessica, Daria, our Chief Strategy Officer Rachel Kim, and our General Counsel. The integration timeline seems ambitious, Rachel was saying, reviewing the documents before us. Combining our platform with your educational curriculum within 6 months. We've already mapped the technical specifications, Jessica interrupted. Based on the materials Elizabeth's team provided, I'm confident we can complete the integration within the proposed timeline. Elizabeth nodded gratefully at Jessica. We've done extensive preparation on our end as well. Our curriculum is structured specifically to be platform compatible. I'd been impressed by the thoroughness of Reynolds Financial's proposal. Elizabeth had reimagined her father's firm into something forward-thinking and collaborative, maintaining the Reynolds name but infusing it with entirely new values. Our partnership, officially branded as Aurelia Next Generation, focused on preparing young women to manage inherited wealth, represented a strategic expansion for both firms. Reynolds would gain access to our technological infrastructure and broad client base, while Aurelia would enhance its specialized offerings in intergenerational wealth education. As the meeting progressed into technical details, my mind briefly drifted to the path that had brought us here. 2 years ago, I'd walked out of Reynolds and Mitchell humiliated by James's dismissive laughter. Today, I sat as the CEO of a company valued at nearly $1 billion, negotiating a partnership with his daughter. The conference room door opened, and Daniel poked his head in. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "The Mitchell and Wallace team is set up in conference room B whenever you're ready for the joint session." As the final phase of our partnership structure, Mitchell and Wallace would provide consultation on integrating the Aurelia Reynolds collaboration into broader wealth management practices across the industry. The 3-way alliance created a powerful ecosystem that approached women's financial empowerment from multiple angles. "We'll be finished here in about 15 minutes, I told him with a smile. After Daniel closed the door, Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "Your husband's firm is consulting on this as well? You've created quite the family business empire." I laughed. "Hardly an empire. More like aligned independent ventures. Daniel and I are careful to maintain appropriate boundaries between our professional lives." "Still," Elizabeth said thoughtfully, "there's something powerful about reshaping an industry, together, even if from different angles." Her observation struck me as surprisingly insightful. Daniel and I were indeed transforming financial services in complementary ways. Me through Aurelia's direct services to women investors, him through Mitchell and Wallace's work helping traditional firms evolve their approach. It wasn't our original plan, I admitted, but sometimes the most effective revolutions happen organically, from multiple directions at once. As we wrapped up the meeting and prepared to join Daniel's team, Elizabeth held back slightly, gesturing for me to wait. When the others had filed, "Out," she spoke quietly. "I visited my father yesterday," she said. "His condition has stabilized, though his cognitive functions remain significantly impaired." I nodded, uncertain why she was sharing this. "I told him about our partnership with Aurelia," she continued. "I don't know how much he comprehended, but when I mentioned your name, he seemed, I'm not sure, regretful, perhaps." The revelation stirred something in me. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a more complex emotion I couldn't immediately identify. "In his more lucid moments," Elizabeth said, "he's acknowledged that his inability to see where the industry was heading cost him everything he'd built, that his dismissal of innovation, particularly around serving women clients, was his greatest professional failure. I absorbed this information, finding myself moved by the tragedy of it. A man who had once seemed so powerful, brought low not just by health, but by his own inability to evolve. "Thank you for telling me," I said sincerely. Elizabeth nodded. "I thought you should know that in his way, he's recognized what you accomplished." She smiled slightly. "Though I doubt he ever imagined his own daughter would ultimately partner with you." "Life rarely follows the paths we expect," I said, thinking of my own journey. We walked together to join the others, our steps in sync despite our different histories. As we entered the larger conference room where Daniel and Thomas had set up their presentation, I felt a sense of completion, of rightness. 2 years ago, James Reynolds's laughter had set in motion a chain of events that transformed not just my life, but an entire industry. His dismissal had been the catalyst for something far greater than either of us could have imagined that day in the conference room. I caught Daniel's eye across the room, and he gave me a small, private smile, a silent acknowledgement of how far we'd come, both individually and together. From ruins, we had built not just successful businesses, but a more authentic relationship and a vision for changing the financial landscape for generations of women to come. Sometimes, I reflected as the presentation began, the people who underestimate you most dramatically are inadvertently handing you your greatest opportunity. And sometimes, a moment of humiliation can be the first step on the path to transformation, if you have the courage to turn laughter into fuel for your journey. 5 years to the day after James Reynolds laughed at my idea, I stood on the balcony of Aurelia's global headquarters, watching the sunset over Chicago. The city skyline had changed, and so had I. Aurelia Financial now managed over $5 billion in assets across 3 continents. Our partnership with Elizabeth Reynolds' firm had evolved into a full merger, creating the industry's premier platform for women's wealth management. Daniel and Thomas's consultancy had been acquired by one of the world's largest financial education providers, spreading their inclusive approach to financial services education globally. The industry that had once dismissed women investors now recognized them as the future. Earlier that day, I'd received news that James Reynolds had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Elizabeth had called personally, her voice steady but sad. "He saw what you built," she'd told me. In his final months, he understood. I wasn't sure why this mattered to me, but somehow it did. This acknowledgement from the man whose dismissal had set everything in motion. The door to the balcony opened, and Daniel stepped out. "Ready to go? Everyone's waiting." Downstairs, in our largest conference room, the original team had gathered: Jessica, Daria, Marcus, and Zoe, alongside the 100-plus employees who now formed Aurelia's core. Catherine Harrington was there, with her daughter, who had recently joined our board. Even Mia had flown in from New York, where she now headed our East Coast operations. As I entered, they raised their glasses. "To 5 years," Jessica called out, and to the laugh that started it all. Laughter and applause filled the room. I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing memories, before finding my way back to Daniel. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked quietly, "when everything changed?" I nodded, looking around at what we had built. Not just the company, but the community, the movement, the transformation of an industry. I think about how sometimes the most painful moments can become our greatest gifts, I said. How rejection can be redirection. Daniel smiled, the silver at his temples catching the light. And how the people who underestimate you can become the catalyst for proving exactly what you're capable of, I finished. Later that night, as we walked home, along the lakefront, the water reflecting city lights like scattered stars, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that began with humiliation had led to revolution, In my industry, in my marriage, in myself. Sometimes, a dismissive laugh is the beginning of your greatest chapter. Sometimes the person who doesn't believe in your vision unknowingly hands you the key to your purpose, and sometimes the tables turn in ways no one could have imagined. Thanks, James, for the laugh. Look what it built.